All right, Blake, we are a month away from Selection Sunday as we speak. A month from now, we're going to be looking at a bracket right in front of us, seeing what's going to happen in the newest edition of the NCAA tournament. And yesterday, the selection committee gave us a little bit of a look into where things stand today. Obviously, 4 weeks remaining, a lot can change, but the bracket preview show happened yesterday. The top 16 seeds got revealed, seed lines 1 through 4. All started off to list all these teams off, and we'll talk some overall reactions, what we think about it, and where things could head as we wind down the final stretch of the regular season here. So it's a no one's surprise. Number one overall seed is Auburn. They've dominated all season long, very well deserved. Just got a statement win yesterday against Alabama. We'll talk about how a lot of these teams throughout all of the seed lines, how they were affected by yesterday's results post the reveal show. Behind Auburn, Alabama comes in at the number 2 overall 1 seed, followed there by Duke and Florida to round out the 1 line. The projected number 1 2 seed as of today, the Tennessee Volunteers, followed by Purdue, Texas A&M, and Houston. Then over on the 3 seed line, we've got TJ Otzelberger's Cyclones, Iowa State leading off as the number 1 overall 3 seed, followed by Kentucky, Wisconsin, and Arizona. And then to round it out, our 4 seeds, number 1 overall 4 seed, Texas Tech, Michigan following them, and then Kansas and St. John's to round it out for the top 16 field. So obviously a lot going on, a lot to be discussed here. The bracket, in terms of the regions, what they would look like. The South region would be Auburn, Texas A&M, Wisconsin, and Texas Tech. Over in the Midwest, it would be Alabama, Purdue, Iowa State, and Kansas. Over in the West region, it would be Florida, Houston, Kentucky, and Michigan. And lastly, Duke, Tennessee, Arizona, and St. John's in the East region if things were to start today. Now, Blake, we're obviously still a couple more weeks away from our favorite time of year, the tournament that everybody loves. Got a lot that can happen from this point on. We'll kind of discuss how the rest of the season could unfold and how it could affect some teams that are in this line and maybe some teams that are looking to work their way into this line. But just looking at what we saw yesterday, what the committee laid out for us, what are some overall reactions that you've got to all this?
I'm going to have to say that Tennessee being the number 1 team out of the number 2 seeds is pretty wild, to say the least. I feel like Houston's a little better as of today than them. Purdue being above A&M and Houston also kind of questionable, I think. Kentucky being a 3 seed. Obviously, this happened before the Texas game, but those hopes are probably done by now, unless they can put some games together against. If they can win against Auburn at Rupp, then I feel like you're right back in 3 seed talk. Arizona being a 3 seed after their horrible start in the season is really wild to see too. And then you got St. John's being the lowest rated team out of the 16 teams that were seeded in the March Madness preview. So this is a really interesting preview for the bracket, I feel like. It's going to be really exciting, I feel like, here in 4 weeks whenever we get the official bracket.
I think when it comes to 4 weeks from now, that 1 seed line, I kind of feel like that might be the safest and one that doesn't see much change. But when I look at this and I see all these teams listed out in front of me, I think that Kansas being in the top 16, that's kind of questionable to me. I'm not high on them overall. Now, I get that there's a whole lot of factors that weigh into bracketology. There's all kinds of metrics, all kinds of things that the committee looks at beyond just what's in front of us in the overall play. But, this is a team that just lost to Utah last night. Granted, that was before the reveal. You obviously got to think that might drop them to the 5 line now. They've got a bad loss against Kansas State, choked a 20-point lead against Baylor. There's just a lot of discouraging results here. Got blown out by Iowa State. West Virginia, that's a team that's on the bubble firmly as of today. They went into Allen Fieldhouse and beat them. And I just think that you could sub them out for maybe a team like Michigan State on the 4 line that's having a great year in the Big Ten. Now, the resume may not be as strong just yet as Kansas because we do know that Kansas had some quality non-conference wins with Duke And then they obviously had some other stumbles as well, though, with Missouri and Creighton. I just think it's kind of baffling that Kansas is there on the 4 line right now. Just overall, I don't like what that team offers. It kind of just feels like a bunch of pieces that were thrown together and don't really fit. But we'll see what happens. I think Kentucky, you mentioned them, Blake. The loss to Texas is obviously bad, but the chair committee there on the show, he did say that injuries are being taken into account, and for Kentucky missing all of their point guards at the moment, I think that kind of factors into why the committee values them a little higher because they see the body of work that Kentucky has when they're healthy. Obviously, they've set an unprecedented amount of top 10 wins and top 15 wins, quad one wins. So Kentucky's got a really strong resume. I think that might at the end outweigh the bad losses and the stretch of play they're having right now where they're not healthy. That I think that could salvage them being on the top 16 when things are said and done. So, well, there's a lot of room for movement, obviously, still. I think that Kansas, though, definitely they're the team that's the least safe on that 4 line right now. St. John's, I think they're going to make their way up as the weeks go on because it looks like they're going to run the table in the Big East, and they've got a resume opportunity against Marquette and UConn coming up, so that's going to help out. Michigan, they got a win today. I think they're going to keep climbing. I agree, though, with what you said about Tennessee as the number 1 overall 2 seed. I thought that Houston was more deserving of that, and you throw Tennessee maybe second and then Purdue third, but it's not my job to seed these teams. I'm just here to give my opinion. But, Blake, I do want to talk about one thing that happened on the 1 seed line yesterday. So, Alabama, they obviously lost to Auburn in that game of the year matchup. It lived up to expectations. A great quality game. Auburn proved to be too much in the end. So do we think now the committee chairman, he also said on that preview show that Auburn and Alabama, whoever gets the number 1 overall seed, that'll be more factored into the next month of play rather than that game in specific yesterday. But do we think that Alabama loss yesterday gives Duke a little bit more wiggle room to make their way to that number 2 overall 1 seed? Because I feel like Auburn is safely going to have that number 1 overall seed regardless of what happens the rest of the way.
I'm sure it does give Duke some wiggle room to be able to sneak into that number 2 overall 1 seed. Alabama, they've put together a huge resume already, but I mean, it's the SEC, so it's really hard to estimate where they're going to end up at the end of the regular season because all the their freaking slates of games coming up. It's unreal. Like they have to play Auburn again.
Brutal.
Like they got to play Kentucky again, but that's going to be at Coleman Coliseum. It's just going to be brutal to say the least. Duke. Then you talk about them, like who they got coming up. Nobody really.
I can tell you who they got coming up if you'd
next
like.
Saturday, right?
Yeah, here's the rest of the schedule for them the rest of the way. Virginia, Illinois, Miami, Florida State, Wake Forest, and UNC. They don't have a ranked opponent the rest of the way.
Yeah, so I mean, they very well could just run the table, and then they could maybe get the 2 seed, depending on how Alabama finishes out. If they somehow can't recover after that Auburn game, which, let's face it, that's not going to happen. They're probably going to be positive at the end of this upcoming slate. So I think Duke can sneak into that number 2 overall seed, but I still think today that Alabama is going to hold on to that second spot.
See, I think that the more likely scenario here, I think that Duke could end up as the 4th number 1 overall seed, and Florida may even surpass them just because you got to think here. Duke, I mean, I talked about their remaining stretch. They're not playing a single ranked opponent, and the committee, they value the quad 1 wins and all that, strength of schedule. Alabama's got the best strength of schedule left in the country, I'm pretty sure. So I think that's going to help them. They're going to pick up wins. Florida, they're going to have chances to build their resume again in the SEC as well. And they also have a win against Auburn as well. Now, Duke obviously has that as well. It's from earlier in the season, though. Who knows what happens if those 2 teams meet up today. But I just think that Duke, it's not even the fact that they're not deserving of it, because I think this team is very talented, and they could easily be one of the teams that wins the national championship. But when we're talking about just building a tournament resume, it's just hard to do that in the ACC. And I mean, they missed on an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity last weekend against a ranked Clemson team. They went down at Little John. This Illinois team, they've kind of fallen off and fallen on their face a little bit. That's not going to be as big of a resume opportunity as they once thought. And really, Duke is kind of relying more on their non-conference resume here with the wins against Auburn, the close loss against Kansas, the win against Louisville, Arizona, and then they had the loss against Kentucky as well. So Duke, they have a good resume. I just think the lack of opportunity coming here down the stretch might be what makes them not as high on the one line as maybe their fans would think. But that's not to
Mm-hmm.
discredit them at all. I mean, they've got to play who's in front of them, then nobody's going to blame them for that. But I mentioned Kansas being the worst team in the top 16. Do you agree with me on that one, Blake? Because I think you might have a different opinion than I do on which team might be the worst on the list, but I think it's Kansas easily right now.
I think. I don't know, actually. I think Michigan and Arizona, maybe. I'm not saying they're bad teams. I just think they're the weakest, like the weak links out of the 16-team bunch. Then you throw in Kansas, too. I don't think they're really spectacular. They have awful space and no real identity as a team, and their struggles continue to shine. Then you got Michigan. I mean, they're only as good as their Twin Towers uh, play together. And then you have Arizona, who relies on their backcourt. And, I mean, if KJ Lewis, Caleb Love, and Carter Bryant aren't on, then I don't know if I said Jaden Bradley. I don't think
Jaden Bradley, yeah.
If those guys ain't on, then I'm sorry to tell you that team is not scary at all. Like they're not good. But I mean, granted, or heck, they played Houston really well. I felt like Houston did control how that game went. Obviously, I mean, Arizona only scored 58 points on the night, but
yeah,
I still think those three teams, 3 teams, are the weakest out of those.
Yeah, and then when we talk about the weakest links, obviously, are there any teams that are outside of this right now that you thought maybe had a case to be in on it? Because I have a certain team in mind that I think could make their way in. Maybe right now they don't have the resume built up just yet, but with the way they're playing, they can find their way in. Was there any team that was missing from this list to you that stood out, or anybody you think could claw their way in there as time goes on?
Maybe Ole Miss, Mississippi State. Those 2 teams, I think, definitely could be in that top 16 seed range. But like both those teams have beat up on each other like twice this season already. But they both have really good resumes. They're both really tough defensively. They play with a ton of physicality. Their offense is starting to evolve a little. Josh Hubbard, he's kind of been inconsistent at times for Mississippi State, unfortunately, but I mean, he's still a good player. Like, don't get me wrong, we've talked about him a million times on here and the page. Then you go to Ole Miss, Sean Padula, really good player. They just got a lot of guys on that team. Malik Dia, Brakefield, guys like that. So I definitely think those 2 teams are 2 that could make their way in, and then maybe Missouri as an outlier team as well.
Ole Miss is definitely going to have some chances as they go down the stretch because Vanderbilt, that'll be a quad 1 opportunity if they get that. They're going to go to Auburn. I'd be surprised if they get that, but make it competitive, and that's good for the resume.
Yeah.
Oklahoma, take care of your business there, and then you got Tennessee on your home court, and then you go to Gainesville, which are 2 games I'd say you can have a shot in. They're not as difficult as Auburn, but you get those 2 under your belt and then you make some noise in the SEC tournament. I think they could be looking at making their way into that top 16. And they've got wins. Obviously, the blowout win against Kentucky, that's going to be a good resume piece. They really missed out on a good resume opportunity when they choked that game against Texas A&M. They competed with Auburn, competed with Missouri. They got swept in the Egg Bowl, but they do own a win against Alabama at Coleman Coliseum as well, so that's a good one. Arkansas, that's a bubble team right now, so that's another one for them. Georgia as well. They had some decent non-conference wins, not the strongest. They kept it close with Purdue, weren't able to get that one, but they did get wins over Louisville and BYU. So I'd say Ole Miss definitely has a chance. The team that I'm thinking of that could make their way into the top 16, just looking at things today, is Michigan State. They sit at 20-5 right now, number 11 in the country. They've got actually 3 or 4 really big opportunities coming up. They've got a stretch here, Blake. They're running a bit of a gauntlet. They
Yeah.
host Purdue. They play Michigan. They go to Maryland. They're going to host Wisconsin, and they also host Michigan again. So if you can get let's say 3 out of 5 games there, possibly, that's going to be huge for them, and they could easily get their way into the top 16. So I think there's an opportunity there. The Indiana loss, that's a bad one for their resume, though. UCLA as well, not a great one. Although they do own some quality ones, too, with Oregon, Illinois. They've beaten a talented Rutgers team, an Ohio State team that's fighting for the bubble right now. They beat UNC. Everybody's beat UNC this year, though, so not much of a surprise there.
Yeah, they're
Uh,
bad.
Kept it close with Kansas. Yeah, there's a chance that Michigan State could work their way on. I'd say right now they're in that 5 to 6 territory, but there's a chance for more, and I think Izzo could easily get it because that squad's got some players. Jace Richardson, Cohen Carr, all those guys. That's a legit squad there in the Big Ten. So get some quality wins down that gauntlet stretch they're running and make some noise in the Big Ten tournament. And I think you're well on your way to maybe making your way into the top 16. But
They
before
don't
we
call
wrap
it.
up,
They don't call it January, February, Izzo for no reason.
yep, that's true. Mr. March, Tom Izzo, that's for sure. But before we wrap this up here, this little bracketology trap edition here, let's talk about the bubble. So the bubble was not revealed on the March Madness preview, but Joe Lenardi, he did update his bubble recently as of this morning, I think. So the last team in currently is Georgia. The first team out is VCU. And then, Blake, could you remind me of what the rest of the bubble looks like? I don't have it pulled up in front of me right now, but I did want to hit on that before we moved on.
Okay, last 4 buys: West Virginia, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, Texas. Last 4 in: San Diego State, BYU, Arkansas, Georgia. First 4 out: VCU, SMU, Wake Forest, North Carolina. Next 4 out: Xavier, IU, Kansas State, Boise State.
All right, so all those teams listed and out on the table there. You can only pick one. You're betting your house on one of these teams to find their way into the big dance with 4 weeks going down the stretch. This is kind of, I don't think this bubble's going to change very much between now and then. But if you had to pick one team that you have the most confidence, it could be anybody from the last 4 buys, last 4 in, or even the first 4, next 4 out slate there. Who you think's going to find their way into the dance the safest and the easiest?
I'm willing to bet a lot of Monopoly money on the fact that Vanderbilt's a lock in the tournament. They've had a win against Tennessee, a win against Kentucky. I'm blanking. They've had more wins as well that are solid. But, I mean, this team is a lot better than some people give credit for. Oh, yeah, they also, let's see, they beat Texas. That's another team that's the last 4 by.
Mm-hmm.
They also beat, Virginia Tech, TCU. I mean, they're okay wins. But yeah, like I was saying, this team is a lot better than a lot of people give credit for. Jason Edwards, I've talked about him a billion times. Hopefully we can get him on for an interview soon, but he's one of the most fun players to watch in all of college basketball right now. Like, this is a guy that consistently makes tough shots. He's a bucket getter. He's super crafty with the ball in his hands. And then you got Jalen Carey, who's the younger brother of Vernon Carey, Duke star at one point. He's playing professionally now. But this is a guy who's really rejuvenated his game. He's tougher than nails in the paint. He's like a back to the basket type of big, like an old school type of big, but he's playing a heck of a game right now. And then the whole team really just meshes well together. Mark Byington, he's done a heck of a job with that program. Took them from a bottom dweller in the SEC to being right there around the middle, lower half still, in a crazy year of the SEC. So I definitely am willing to put all my money on the fact that Vanderbilt's the best team out of all those.
Yeah, and when you look at their upcoming opportunities to kind of boost themselves and get them safely in the field, they're going to Rupp on Wednesday night. Now, Kentucky might be a little bit beat up in that one, so you're looking at that one as possibly one you can steal and complete the regular season sweep. Then they host Ole Miss, and they're going to travel to Texas A&M. I'd say you probably want to try and split that one. And then
Mm-hmm.
you host Missouri, and you probably want to steal that one against Missouri at home, and then finish off the regular season with games against Arkansas and Georgia. You got to take care of your business there to put yourself safely in. But I agree with you there. I think that that's a team I would feel the most confident about being in the field. You want to know a team that I'm not confident about making the field, Blake?
Arkansas? Is that who you're about to say?
Close. They are second, but the Georgia Bulldogs.
Oh, yeah, what?
Yeah,
Get them
no,
out of here. I'm sorry.
they're they're currently listed as the last team in the field. Now, they have dates upcoming here with Auburn and Florida. I'm just going to be honest, I don't see them winning those games. Then they
Mm-mm.
have games against Texas, South Carolina, and Georgia. So I think that it's going to take probably a win against Texas and Vanderbilt, and then a little bit of extra work in Nashville at the SEC tournament to get them in. Now,
Mm-hmm.
they do, if you're trying to look on the bright side here, they did get a win against Kentucky. But other than that, in conference play, they really don't have anything to hang their hat on besides a close loss to Auburn. So
Yeah.
I'd definitely be nervous if I'm a Bulldog fan. And then for Arkansas, I think that I'd be a little bit concerned about them as well because they have to play Auburn on Wednesday night. Then they've got to host Missouri on Saturday, and then they still have to host Mississippi State at the end of the regular season. They're also going to be playing Texas, South Carolina, and Vandy. So
It
there's a
ain't
lot of
getting
work
easier.
there.
It
Yeah,
ain't getting
it's
easier.
no, and you could see Cal in his post game yesterday. He was starting to feel the pressure. He was saying it's not all right for us to be saying it's all right right now because we
He
got to
was
beat
tweaking.
somebody.
I've never
Yeah,
seen
and
him
then
act like that. Like, he went from being like super calm to it's on us. Like,
yeah,
basically is what he was saying. Like, I've never seen that guy act like that before.
Yeah, he was kind of crashing out there. But I'd say that, I mean, they're the last two teams in on the bubble as of now, and I'd say they're the
Mm-hmm.
teams I'm the least confident in. Besides, like North Carolina, they're
Get
not
them
going to
out of
get
here.
in.
They're not making the
No,
tournament, and if they do, it's solely because of their name. Like,
yep,
I'll just put
and
that point blank. Their big suck. Ian Jackson, he had a good game against Syracuse last night, but besides that, dude, like, that team is not good.
now hear me out. What if we lived in some crazy world where we got a last four in, which would be the first four in Dayton, of North Carolina, Arkansas, Indiana, and San Diego State. Now tell me you wouldn't be tuned into that because that would be
I
one of the
would
best.
be. I
That would
would
be
be,
one of
but
the
I mean,
best
that's
first
like
fours.
uh, freaking
Indiana rallying for
Arkansas.
Mike Woodson.
Arkansas with the freaking woo pig, John Calipari crazies. Then you add in freaking Mike Woodson's last redemption, like the final chapter of his coaching
Coaching
career at
career,
IU.
yeah.
I don't get that though. He's been awful all year, and he's still gonna find a way to make it to March. If that happens, I'm 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 done with this podcast and
I
stuff.
I'm not buying any stock in Indiana making it, but that would be an all-time first four if possible. But SMU, that's another team I don't see making it in because I think they don't have any quad one wins where we stand right now. And
Unfortunately not. It'd be
when
good for basketball though, and good for the ACC because they got some talent on there.
yeah, and then on that next four outline specifically that I'm looking at, Kansas State, is there a chance that they just completely turn this around and find their way in? I mean, they took a bad loss yesterday, but they put together some good wins. I just
I
think it's going to
think,
be too much to overcome.
yeah, it's going to be too much to overcome with too little of time, and I think that loss against BYU after that hot streak they were riding, I feel like this just puts them right back to mediocrity practically.
Yeah, I think I'm agreeing with you on there. But Wake Forest on that first four outline, do we think they find a way into the dance?
No, no, no,
No,
no. I hope not. Actually,
probably
let
not.
me rephrase that. Rephrase that. I would like to see Hunter Salas play in March Madness, but I don't think that team's got it. I mean, they've lost some games they shouldn't have. Uh, I mean, congrats, you guys beat North Carolina.
Hmm.
Like,
Everybody's
but
doing that.
yeah, I mean, it's just an ad team, and I don't know if we need that in
Yeah,
March.
no. Well, we're definitely going to have a lot more to talk about when it comes to the bubble and the evolution of bracketology after this preview show. There's going to be a lot to follow. Teams sliding in and sliding out of the tournament on the bubble, and then those top 16. That's going to be a very fluent situation as well. I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit more about brackets in the coming weeks over here. But before we part, I will say one thing. I've been saying it for weeks now. If New Mexico, do not let New Mexico get in the dance, because if
Dude,
they
they're
find their
so
way
hot.
in, Donovan Dent is going to upset somebody. I'm
He's
calling it right
insane.
now. Yeah, he's a stud. That team all around, they're very solid, and they made the tournament last year too.
We need them in the tournament because they're 22-4 and they're playing good. Like Utah State's a good team, and they just beat them by 3 in a really, really, really tough game. And then that
Yeah,
New Mexico team in general, freaking Ty Washington's uncle, which is crazy because this kid's younger than him. But True Washington, he's freaking had an unbelievable game 25, 5, and 4. Like, it's unbelievable, to be honest with you. He's having a really good season, and, like, nobody really, I feel like, expected him to. He was a 4-star out of high school, but, I mean, he's putting up really good numbers in a solid conference.
yeah, they're on an 8-game win streak right now, so I hope they get in the dance. I want to see Donovan Dent there. He's a mid-major stud, but Blake, I think we've hit on all the bracket we need to for today. We'll be talking about this much more down the stretch. 4 more weeks, folks. We're almost there. Selection Sunday gets closer every day. I can't wait.